And the last thing, I'm never going to forget, the last thing they said to me is like, can you move any part of the right body of your body? Can you move that leg at all? In my mind, I took everything and I was going, ah! I'm like, and my leg just twitched. And then I just remember the doctor saying, put him out, put him out. Boom, I was out. Next thing you know, I wake up in the hospital, like literally like wake up in the hospital bed and my family's all around me. And I'm looking around and I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, I survived. And then I started thinking, I'm like, well, okay, I got the disability insurance policy.
This is the Recovery After Stroke podcast with Bill Gasiamis, helping you navigate recovery after stroke.
Hello and welcome to Recovery After Stroke, a podcast full of answers, advice, and practical tools for stroke survivors to help you take back your life after a stroke and build a stronger future. I'm your host, three-time stroke survivor, Bill Gasiamis. After my own life was turned upside down and I went from being an active father to being stuck in hospital, I knew if I wanted to get back to the life I loved before, my recovery was up to me. After years of researching and discovering, I learned how to heal my brain and rebuild a healthier and happier life than I ever dreamed possible. And now I've made it my mission to empower other stroke survivors like you to recover faster, achieve your goals, and take back the freedom you deserve. If you enjoy this episode and want more resources, accessible training, and hands-on support, check out my Recovery After Stroke Coaching membership. Created especially for stroke survivors and caregivers, this is your clear pathway to transform your symptoms, reduce your anxiety, and navigate your journey to recovery with confidence. Head to recoveryafterstroke.com to find out more after this podcast. But for now, let's dive right into today's show. This is episode 175, and my guest today is Chris Martin, who is a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu enthusiast and coach who experienced an ischemic stroke due to repeated traumas to the carotid artery sustained in the sport while he was being choked and strangled by his opponents. Now, Chris is on a mission to raise awareness in the BJJ community about the risks of the sport, but more importantly is interested in raising awareness about how to spot the signs of stroke and how to take action fast if you suspect someone at a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu event or BJJ event may be showing the signs of stroke. Since this is a stroke prevention interview, please share it far and wide. If you have been meaning to share an episode of the podcast and haven't got around to it yet, this is the one to share. Whether you are listening on a podcast app or watching on YouTube, there has never been a better episode to share. It would mean so much to me, and it might just help save a life. Thank you. Chris Martin, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. How are you?
Man, I'm doing well. I really appreciate you reaching out because this topic that we're going to talk about today is something that's really close to my heart and something that I've worried about since my own stroke and since learning about dissections in arteries. But before we get into that part of it, tell me a little bit about what happened to you.
I think the best way to summarize it is a lack of awareness in what I do. And first, my hobby is what we're going to talk about today, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. And I'm very passionate about it. I found it in 2008 at a time in my life where I needed it. And it did change my life in many ways, and I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. However, for the general listener, I want them to understand what Brazilian Jiu Jitsu is a martial art that is used. The best way I can describe it is to use the least energy and exertion to manage your output and put the end goal in a combative situation using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is to get to the back and finish with a strangle. In the sport, the misconception is you hear the word chokeholds, but in the medical field, chokes and strangles are two different things. What we do is we try to strangle our friends as quick as we can, and they tap out when they feel like there's no way that they can get out of the strangle. And if they feel like they're going to maybe pass out, go to sleep. And they usually, my friends are pretty crazy, and they will wait as long as they can until they almost go to sleep, or they might go to sleep, many of them. And we do this to each other about 6 to 7 days a week, sometimes twice a day.
And when you
That's
say strangling, what you're actually doing is you're placing pressure either with your arms or with your legs onto the neck, and
good.
that impacts the vertebral or the
Carotid.
the carotid arteries, and decreases the blood flow to the brain. So
Correct.
they have no choice but to go limp, and
And we
then
get, yep. And they go, and we the more we do this as Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners who are very passionate about this, we find even sneakier and sneakier and more efficient ways to apply pressure to the vertebrals and the carotids. Sometimes we wear these fancy outfits that looks like pajamas. They're called gis, and they have long straps that we can pull out. It would look like a karate kimono. However, we use it to wrap around each other's necks. It has collars we use to hold the collars, pull, strangle, apply pressure at the same time as we're putting knees in the back of the vertebrals. We are ripping bow and arrow chokes. We are pulling materials around the person's neck. I should have wore a gi. I could go get one if I need to, but you get the picture. And it's a relatively fast-growing sport because of how addictive and how healthy it is from the standpoint of mental health and physical health. So it's who I am as somebody who fell in love with Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in a time in my life where I needed something from a mental standpoint and a physical standpoint. I was not in a good place in my life at 28 years old, and I'm 43 now, and I have not stopped doing what I love. However, in 2017, it was during a periodic 2 months of pretty heavy strangling with my friends, working on specific chokes to the back, making our chokes more efficient. And one day in practice, I was caught in a strangle. And again, like I said, we have the opportunity to either tap or go to sleep, or in my case, just keep fighting out of it, to try to find a way out. Because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the mindset has always been there's always a way out. And that's what helps develop your character, because you learn to overcome adversity through Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, through being strangled and putting yourself in very bad positions that are very uncomfortable. And you do it again and again and again, and it makes you more of a humble human being. And that's the beauty of Jiu-Jitsu. However, that day in August of 2017, I did not tap out, and I was very unaware that the strangles that I had accumulated over the years could potentially cause a little bit of damage, trauma, to my carotid arteries. Over time, I had a little bit of a tear on my left carotid artery, and um, I did have some signs I learned after I had the stroke because I had missed the signs, um, because of the lack of awareness in the sport. Um, and it's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. And I had, um, I didn't tap out. However, my partner let go of me when he felt my body just limp. And I just remember the room spinning. I was on my back. I couldn't communicate. No words were coming out of my mouth. Long story short, it was a full ischemic stroke. The clot was on my neck was very large. It had been sitting there for some time. I had not given it time to heal. And that day, the torque of the north-south choke applied by my teammate Rob shot the clot to my brain, which immediately caused an ischemic stroke. The medical team at Freighter in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, administered the TPA. They were able to get me to the hospital within an hour. They had the TPA shot to the brain, saved my life, and here I am on Stroke to Recovery podcast, and you're still recovering, to this day. However, during that time, what happened to me that day didn't make sense. And while I was in the hospital, it didn't make sense. And when I was out the month after, it didn't make sense. And it put me on a path of research and understanding. And through that journey, I did receive a phone call right after this happened. Because I was on a article came out about it on Jiu Jitsu Jiu Jitsu Times, and then immediately I got a phone call from somebody who was very interested, and he was a former military person, and he was very interested because he had been doing parachuting in the military, and he had like double carotid artery dissection, which caused strokes both sides. And he was like trying to get back into martial arts, but he just wasn't sure if it was a good idea. And he was telling me how rare this whole thing is. And he said, he goes, you need to document what you're doing. And I said, okay. I'm like, I started writing, and then just putting up little blogs, and then people started reaching out to me in the martial art community who've also it happened to them. And I started interviewing them to learn more about their cases. I would ask, can I record it so I can always reference it, because I'm not going to remember anything in this interview. And most of them all agreed yes. So during my time of healing and recovery, I was able to talk to other survivors. And through that conversation, I learned about what happened to them and how it happened. And did you have signs? Did you this? And then I started documenting on a spreadsheet. And then let's put it this way. Over the past 4 years, and now here we are, the spreadsheet, I stopped counting after over 100. And so it's not as rare as we think. However, it's very people are very uneducated. There's no protocols. There's some gyms that are just completely brushing it under the rug. There's some gyms that have had multiple people in the same gym have strokes, and the instructors still are brushing it under the rug. And so the hard part for that is that each person who has their stroke, they have their story in their head. They look at themselves as a number. This is me. But the difference that I see in what happened, and then they go about their daily lives, and it's just that. And but what happens is I get the call from every single one of them, and then I uh, form a relationship with them, and I talk to them, and then I even get the bad ones too, the ones from the widows, the ones from that are still in the wheelchair, the ones that are still in the hospital fighting, and these are people who were on these are jiu-jitsu people. They're different, and no different than, they're passionate about what they do. It's just there. It takes a physical person. It takes somebody who is. It's okay to get your ass kicked type of thing, and come over and over and over again. Like, these aren't weak-minded people. These are very, very strong-minded people,
They've
and
never
they do
they've,
not like they do not like to lose.
they've never messed with stroke. That's the issue, and stroke will get the better of a lot of people that are very strong-willed. I think the beauty of jiu-jitsu is it does create a great foundation for overcoming serious adversity in life, and the skills can be transferred to stroke recovery, right? And what's interesting is my son, who's 25 now, started BJJ probably about 3 or 4 years ago after it gained popularity because of mixed martial arts and UFC. And he's given me the whole I did it for my mental health spiel as well. And it's really interesting that the lessons that he's able to obtain about calmness, thinking, not overreacting, and
Yes.
not breathing inappropriately, and focusing on the mind and body connection has really shifted this guy who in our modern world was quick to becoming a statistic of anxiety and maybe even depression or something like that. So the camaraderie that he has there with the people that he trains with. So I see the major upside to a sport like BJJ. And then as somebody who's experienced 3 hemorrhagic strokes, and I'm into my 10th year of recovery, and I've met hundreds of stroke survivors and widows and the bad ones, the ones that are still, struggling to get back to some kind of version of life that resembles normality, which they never do. Most of us have a different version of what normal is.
Yeah.
Um, the I hate to discourage my son about BJJ. I hate to say to him, listen, don't go down this path because of this issue. And as kids, what they used to do, my son and his brother, is they used to choke each other and smash each other and belt each other. And for me, it was like, don't touch each other's heads and don't touch each other's throats. Do not do that because you can damage arteries and you can cause strokes and you can cause long lasting effects. So please don't do that. Now, the other thing I'm concerned about is that he might be involved in an incident where he creates a situation for somebody else that ends with them being hospitalized because of a carotid artery or vertebral artery dissection and then a stroke, right? And it's like there is there is definitely more that needs to be done. I'm glad you reached out. I'm not glad that you had a stroke, and I'm not glad that it's happening. But the fact that you've taken this stance where most people sweep it under the carpet, I think it's really fabulous because it's a problem around the world. And in Australia, the amount of people that my son goes to BJJ with that are his age and older and younger, but of course, they're all his mates. So there's probably about 10 of them that I know. And then there's other people that are my age in the early 40s and 50s that are going to BJJ or just started. And I would imagine that they are completely unaware of this situation as well, right? So
100%.
I could reach out right now to at least 15 people that I know personally that go to BJJ, and I wonder if they know anybody who's had a stroke or
Oh,
not due to a sports injury. And then I wonder if they know how it's been dealt with and how that person's is now, and whether they've managed to come back to BJJ or they gave it up completely. I imagine that most people who have an injury because of a sport like that would go, enough, I'm not coming back to that sport.
I think most would, but the just jumping back into, what I said before is that this is what has changed my life. So I use this comparison every time. I think I just see it the most. It's if a surfer goes into the ocean and he goes surfing and he gets bit by a shark, but that's everything. That was his passion. That's his lifestyle. Like, he wakes up in the morning, he has his coconut juice. You know what I mean? He skateboards down with his long boarder. He's got his everything, and the sun is good. Like, everything's great. And then he gets attacked by a shark, and but he lives, and it was the scariest moment of his life. And but he recognizes, he recognizes the signs. That was a night after the storm. You know what I mean? And that's when the sharks are out, or it's a low tide. Now he's aware of it, and instead of ignoring and just jumping in and pretending like it would never happen to him, or just not even thinking about it, but it's something that he loves. Will he go back? I would think that the surfer is going to go back in the water, but he's just going to go back in differently, and that's how I've re-entered the waters from my perspective.
Yeah. So tell me about what you had to recover from. So you're in a you're in a you're rolling with one of your competitors, friends,
Yep.
and you end up going limp, and then you're out, and then it's not good. So tell me a little bit about what happened after that, and then we'll talk about what you had to overcome.
So I didn't go out. It was just, you're looking around and you're trying to sit up. My whole right side of the body was completely like just limp. So I couldn't move. So I was trying to get up, and if it was, the room was kind of spinning around, and it felt like it was just like slow motion. And it was kind of like "Roo, roo," and I was trying to communicate, like, to my, they're all rolling around me, all my teammates, and they thought they thought I was just kind of, lightheaded, and it was just, he was just about to go out, because that happens sometimes. You get lightheaded sometimes if you don't tap right away. Um, and that's kind of how it felt. It kind of felt like I was kind of in that corridor between being put to sleep and not. But I was like living in the middle somehow, and it just wasn't wearing off, if that makes sense. But
Yeah.
um, the hard part was just not knowing what was happening to me. When it happened, you have no control of your right side of your body. You cannot speak. You know what you want to say, but the words can't come out, and you're trying to communicate, and you just can't, and the brain is not functioning. And luckily, after about 5 minutes, they realized something's not right with this guy, and they called. My fortunate situation is that I live in. We're here, and this happened in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, and Freighter is in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, which is during the middle of the day, like whatever time it was. It was midday sometime. It only took half hour to get there. But some of these other stroke survivors, they don't. And it's the reason I say some places are going to know how to deal with what's happening here on a higher level. And they're going to have the right equipment, and they're going to have the right doctors, and they're going to have the right experience. And other places might not have access to that, because we don't have cutting edge. Like Oak Creek is in like close to Milwaukee. Milwaukee's close, like that's like a big city. Like Chicago's the big city next to us, but like every state's got their like big city, and that's where the good hospitals and doctors and everything are. That's basically where it happened to me. So I was fortunate. The whole ride in the ambulance, I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know what was happening to me. All I was doing was focusing on my breathing. So, going back to what you said, learning to be calm under pressure, I was like Lamaze basically, and like just trying, like, I didn't know. I'm like just telling myself, just relax your body, let them take care of you, relax your body. And then I, you're thinking about your kids, you're thinking about your life insurance policies,
Wow.
that's all going through your head. You're coming to terms with things. You're just, and then I just remember once they got me into that emergency room, they were asking me questions.
If you've had a stroke and you're in recovery, you'll know what a scary and confusing time it can be. You're likely to have a lot of questions going through your mind. Like, how long will it take to recover? Will I actually recover? What things should I avoid in case I make matters worse? Doctors will explain things, but obviously you've never had a stroke before. You probably don't know what questions to ask. If this is you, you may be missing out on doing things that could help speed up your recovery. If you're finding yourself in that situation, stop worrying and head to recoveryafterstroke.com, where you can download a guide that will help you. It's called 7 Questions to Ask Your Doctor About Your Stroke. These 7 questions are the ones Bill wished he'd asked when he was recovering from a stroke. They'll not only help you better understand your condition, they'll help you take a more active role in your recovery. Head to the website now, recoveryafterstroke.com, and download the guide. It's free.
And the last thing I'm never going to forget, the last thing they said to me is like, can you move any part of the right body of your body? Can you move that leg at all? In my mind, I took everything and I went, ah! I'm like, and my leg just twitched. And then I just remember the doctor saying, put him out, put him out. Boom, I was out. Next thing you know, I wake up in the hospital, like literally like wake up in the hospital bed and my family's all around me. And I'm looking around and I'm like, oh shit. I'm like, I survived. And then I started thinking, I'm like, well, okay, I got the disability insurance policy. I mean, that's what I've been doing insurance for 20 years. So this is all I think about is insurance. So, but that's what I was thinking about. And then I couldn't speak, I was trying to, like, they were holding up, the things like chair, like I was trying to say the words. I understood everything they were saying. I could read, you know what I mean? But I couldn't communicate.
Yeah.
And then I just didn't really have any feeling in my right hand. And then from there, it was like basically just how did this, like, laying in the hospital next couple days, what happened? This does not make any sense. What's the stroke? Like I couldn't even, like, I didn't know what was going on the whole time there. I didn't know what was going on. And then I got home. I still didn't know what was going on. I still didn't know. Like I was so naive and ignorant about strokes. And I mean, right when got out of the hospital after a dissection with I have a stent in my neck now. After I went back to the doctor, they said the clot was so big we had to stint it because you need to lay low and blah blah blah. See, back in the day when people told me to lay low, doctors, you just go and whatever. I'm not going to lay low. 2 days after I get out of the hospital, I'm trying to go to Planet Fitness to try to lift weights. Yeah, I mean that's how uneducated I was. And then I realized that night, like I was like trying to like lift. I'm like, this is not happening. Like I'm like seriously, like looking back, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like I could have had another stroke. The clot was still there, and I'm in Planet Fitness throwing around weights because I'm trying to get back to jiu-jitsu shape. Because I'm pissed off that something like this would set me back. Completely ignorant. And now, after, like I said, I had the conversation with the guy, and then like told me to start documenting, and then I started getting serious about it, and I started having all these conversations, and I'm like, oh my god, this is some serious stuff.
Yeah, man, it's so serious that the reality is the World Stroke Organization says that 1 in 4 people will have a stroke in their lifetime. Man, how they have the stroke varies a lot. There's so many different ways to have one, right? Most of the strokes are preventable. They say about 90% of them are preventable, caused by mostly our the way we eat, smoking, drinking, drugs, all the vices that people tend to have, and most of them are self-inflicted, just like heart disease and cancers and all that kind of stuff, right? And then there's unfortunate situations where somebody's driving a car, they have a minor collision and they get a bit of whiplash, and that causes a carotid artery dissection or a vertebral artery dissection. And I've interviewed heaps of people that are recovering from that, right? And the situation is if 1 in 4 people are going to have a stroke in their lifetime, and the United States has what, 300 million people?
A lot of people.
Man, that is 80 million people or more at some point will have a stroke, right? So the situation is so critical. And I started talking about stroke in 2013 after my first 2 brain hemorrhages in 2012. And I was going to community events and talking about the prevention of stroke. What is it? How to recognize the signs? What to do if somebody is having a stroke? Okay, basically the fast message, right? Face, arms, speech, time. And then I'm still doing those presentations, and it's been nearly 10 years since I started doing them. It'll be 9 years next year. And not much has changed. Not many people have an awareness of somebody having had a stroke. And if they do, they don't pay enough attention to go, what happened to them? Usually it's associated with older people, and it's not associated from collisions, from a car, from whiplash. It's not associated from sports or any of that stuff. But in Australia, I'm not sure if you're aware of the sport cricket, but we had one of our much loved Australian cricket players get hit in the neck by a cricket ball at a pretty rapid pace, which is like a baseball. And he was hit in one of the carotid arteries. He fell and died on the spot that he was hit immediately because of a massive tear in one of his carotid arteries, and he bled to death in his neck. So even then, there wasn't much done by the cricket community to raise awareness beyond making it a massive headline on TV and throughout the country. And probably the cricket playing world where this person had played, which would have been England, maybe Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, all those countries where cricket's popular, New Zealand. But there wasn't really any more said about the actual cause of the death, which was that the artery was damaged, and that's not uncommon, and it's possibly something that can be prevented by neck gear being worn. Now, this guy wore headgear, and his head is protected to about his neck, similar to what baseball players wear when they're facing the pitcher. But beneath there isn't any protection, because you imagine in a sport like that, it would be quite, maybe it might get in the way of the way they play the game, and it might be a little bit difficult to handle. And the lack of times that has happened in such a large event where it made news all over the place, the amount of times that that's happened, that are still rare, but there hasn't been really a move towards making it safer for somebody around their neck on the side of their body that's facing the bowler. So I'm staggered. This is why I started the podcast. I'm staggered by the lack of awareness. The podcast was about me meeting other people so that I could feel better about myself. And here I am, 175 or so episodes in, and not much has changed. And I'm not expecting it to change like that overnight. I think we've got a long job to do. But then here we go. Here's some bloke that I normally would have nothing to do with from the other side of the planet reaching out to me and says, man, we need to raise awareness about stroke in BJJ. And automatically what I'm thinking is, at the BJJ conference that happens annually all over the world, I'm thinking, wouldn't it be great for somebody to get up and go to that event and say, hey guys, let me tell you about stroke. what happened to me, my story, what happened to all the other people who I've interviewed, and let me tell you about what to do if somebody you think on the mat is having a stroke. What are the signs? How do we get them help? How do we take action fast and possibly save their life and minimize the damage?
Yeah, so I completely agree with you. The the hard part about that is, from what I've experienced so far, is finding, those organizations that do get all the coaches under the one tent all at the same time. I did hats off to the BJJ Mental Coach podcast, Gustavo Dantas. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona. And 2 years ago, he did put on he hosted the coaches seminar. He tried to get as many coaches in Arizona to come, and it was a number of different speakers. One person spoke about mental health. One person spoke about PTSD. One person spoke about and so it was one of those types of value add, and how do we make our gyms better, what do we do better as a community for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and how do we make it safer for our participants. Gustavo Dantas put that on. Now, I don't know how many coaches. There are probably X amount of schools. Nowadays there's in every city and every state in the United States, there's a couple of jiu-jitsu gyms. So that means there's a lot of coaches. I would guess there's probably a couple hundred coaches in Arizona. Gustavo was able to get probably 25 of them, which is a great step, but that's still 175 that you haven't touched. And then, that just leaves it at that day. So it is a good start. However, what I feel like where we are at a more critical point, what I heard you say is that you are very aware that traumatic car accidents are what causes a lot of vertebral and the carotid dissections, and that's the blunt or the excessive force. So I have an article. It was a 2019 case study in the Journal of Vascular Ultrasound journal, and it was written by 5 authors. Michelle Stempman is listed first, so Stempman and 5 others put together this case study. And to summarize it, and I'll just say, the discussion is blunt trauma, and it says, quote unquote, following major trauma such as motor vehicle crashes, aggressive screening using computed CTAs have been recommended. So the reason I'm telling you this is because from my case studies, many healthy jiu-jitsu practitioners who have had dissections have been misdiagnosed and sent home. And they have not had the right screenings done to them. And so later on, because they did not recognize the signs later on through activity or day to day, it caused the stroke later on. So it was a misdiagnosis. The reason I'm telling you that is because this article goes on to talk about the different strokes, or I'm sorry, the different chokes. And again, they're continuing to call these in jiu-jitsu strokes, but these are really strangles, because the choke is when you have something going down your passageway and you're I'm choking. I can't breathe. We're not choking each other. We're not sticking our fingers down each other's throats. We're compressing the carotid arteries and the vertebral arteries to constrict blood flow to the brain as quickly and as efficiently as possible. And through that compression is causing what this article is saying is it is the equivalent to motor vehicle crashes. Some of these strangles. The one that they talk about is the guillotine. They call it the guillotine drop type maneuver. Appears to have the same kinetic force that being involved in a high-speed rear-end motor vehicle crash also does.
Wow.
So the guillotine is I grab under your neck, I wrap under either just my other hand, or I come under your shoulder, and then I press down on your head, throw my legs around your back, and pull you to the ground, cranking the neck and back, and at the same time restricting the blood flow on both carotid arteries. This article all goes on to say that studies, well, this article was written because what they're saying is that because of the increase in mixed martial arts, this was a case study they did on a former Marine drill sergeant, and he was in the Marine Corps teaching combatives, and Marine Corps, and he had a carotid artery dissection following a guillotine choke. So they said that part of the Marine Corps close combative training involved teaching and demonstrating chokeholds, which for several years, this 46-year-old man offered himself up as a practice model. One of these chokes was the guillotine choke or guillotine drop, and that's the one that they go on to say in the article that it's about the same amount of pressure as a high speed rear end. So, and that the reason I'm saying this is because that blunt force from that motor vehicle crash, that when you go into the ER and you tell them that happens, then they can figure it out, and then they do the proper scans, which usually are CTAs. If they try to do a CAT scan or an MRI without contrast, they are not going to find the dissection. And then if they send that person home, they could have a stroke later on. That's the danger.
Okay, so what we need to do is get the message out there. We need to get people to start recognizing what a stroke looks like, and then when they're taking that person to get them assistance and get help, explain that they were being choked, and at the same time, beg your pardon, they were being strangled, and at the same time, that they may have a dissection in one of their vertebral or carotid arteries, therefore treat it as a collision of a vehicle.
Right. Aggressively treat it. And so a success story that I've recently had was an email from a gentleman who had a carotid artery dissection. They took him into the ER. They explained it to the doctors what he was doing. The doctors aren't all going to be like, oh yeah, jiu-jitsu, I know exactly what that is. Like, it's kind of a new thing. However, he sent me a thank you letter because the doctor went in on Google after listening to what these people said, his training partners. He Googled, and whatever he found, the article that's ranking right now is going to be if you type in like chokes, strokes from chokes in jiu-jitsu, or chokes in whatever keywords you want. The BJJ Asia did a article just ripping my article, saying, hey, Chris Martin, here's his research. These are what you got to look for. Like, these are what doctors need to look for. These are the screenings. So I've documented everything and I put it out there the best that I can. Like, you type in like strokes in jiu-jitsu, you should be finding some Chris Martin articles. I've put out as much stuff as I can. And the good news is that you're right. that's what they should do, and then the doctors need to treat it accordingly. This article, the reason it's very interesting to me, is that the fact that they go on to say that, you know, this is somebody, this Marine Corps combatives instructor had been, you know, doing this for many years, has taken trauma. They did when they brought him in, they used a DUS. It's a it's a what do you call these things? Um, Duplex Ultrasound. Have you ever heard of it?
Never.
Yeah, so this duplex ultrasound is a screening tool that they're saying can detect if there's something funky in the carotid arteries or the vertebral arteries. Instead of going in and doing a CTA every time, they're saying maybe this is a medical device that we could use. And so what they show here, I'm looking at, you know, a clean, you know, what a clean uh, looks like, and then what this guy's look like. And you can clearly see in ultrasound the blue, the blockage around, like it's not as clean. There's some it says elevated velocities in the distal common carotid artery consistent with a high grade lesion. You know what I mean? So what I believe is that most people are not aware this exists. I'm still learning. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
learning on a daily basis, and it's been 4 years. So, you know, going back to you saying, you know, it's been 10 years. Where are we going with this? Man, time flies, and I'm learning on a daily basis. Like even just learning about this new screening tool, um, reading this case study. This is new to me, but it just shows. And then with I've got over 100 cases that I've documented. I've worked with a doctor who put together a case study with some of the data that I've collected. We're waiting to get that published. It's just basically a case study that shows, hey, here are a number of people. This is what they presented. This is what it was. Just kind of making the community aware, like there's this sport that exists. It's called Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, and this is what they're doing.
Yeah.
And really, what this article sums it up the best by, you know, Stepman. She says, you know, it's, you know, these guys and girls who are practicing this. The physicians need to be aware that there's hard trauma on these necks. They're not thinking about it like that, but because of that, they're saying these athletes could benefit from some early detection from using a tool like this.
Yeah.
And so I'm doing more research on these myself. I might buy one for myself just to have it at my house, just to check my carotid arteries. Why not? And you know, it's funny. It's here. The reason that it doesn't exist, that the awareness is not there, is because we don't want to think about this. It's not something that we want to think about.
Correct.
And nobody wants to take the time to think about something that's not going to happen to them. I wouldn't want to take any time to think about something that's not going to happen to me. So eventually what's going to happen, if you want my personal opinion, is that similar to safety protocols that in the United States, if you have a factory, you have employees. If you have employees, you have rules that you have to follow for the safety of those employees. And then there's governing organizations such as OSHA, they call it, and they have training manuals and instructions and posters that need to be put up and waivers that need to be filled out to bring awareness to the safety issues inside the workplace. And I don't see that Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu should be any different. I think that to get the proper insurance, I think you should have to go through these types of training. Every instructor should not have an option to attend the annual conference. The instructors should be, again, if they want this insurance for their gym, they're going to have to, you know, go through the safety protocols and bring awareness and have the training to understand the signs, not give them
Yeah.
an option, because none of them are going to take the time to do it.
Yeah. You know what? There's a legal nightmare waiting to explode on somebody who comes across a client, or somebody who's attending their gym, is not made aware of the risks, and then ends up injured, and then decides to take legal action and sue that organization. I reckon it's a
Well,
legal nightmare about to happen for somebody. What's
good.
interesting is the International BJJ Federation. On their website, I'm looking at it now. European. It
Yeah,
covers the European Jiu Jitsu Federation. It covers the Pan Jiu Jitsu Federation and a whole bunch of other um, federations or organizations. Have an anti-doping policy, and they have an anti-doping section on their website. Um, the there is a known condition that happens to lumberjacks, okay, which is carotid artery dissections and vertebral artery dissections, because when they're cutting down trees and they're looking down, and then they want to see where the tree is about to fall and looking up,
wow.
it is causing repetitive trauma to those arteries, and it's causing um, ischemic strokes. So there's an awareness in that community, and perhaps they don't really talk about it to this extent, but maybe there is some version of understanding of recognizing the signs of it, because I imagine over the hundreds of years that people have been cutting trees down, that they would have come across this very many times. So it is early days for BJJ as a serious sport that has evolved or emerged from Brazil, where the two founders are world renowned, and now it's starting to be it started to take off because of UFC and because of mixed martial arts. So there would have to be some kind of a movement at in the this is kind of the groundswell I'm feeling, but then it'll have to accelerate at some point, and I think it'll accelerate by you doing what you're doing, us putting out content about it. I want to prevent stroke, but I feel like the least help available for stroke survivors is after they come home. So what happens after I come home? There's no support there. But of course, I would rather not have a show, because that meant that there was no stroke survivors.
Well,
Um,
that's the goal right there. Because
yeah,
here's the thing in jiu-jitsu. See, most that 1 in 4 stat, I believe if you break that down and you throw everybody in a bucket, most of those people are on the older end. It's more of a lifestyle induced stroke.
true.
Uh, and the jiu-jitsu community is more of a health
Fitness,
conscious fitness,
mental
and
health.
so mental health as well. They're a different stat, you know what I mean? So the what go in going back to um you know making this a priority, to uh bring awareness to people. I don't think that it's fair that people are going into it without knowing.
Mm,
But again, I'm also going to say this: you can't fault the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu community for not knowing. So it's, we're really in this, and nobody here is. I am not here to stop. Obviously, I'm still training myself. I created a lifestyle. However, um, there does have to be some awareness to what we're doing to each other. And what I do know is this. So I'm sorry if don't have a show anymore, because we do come, you and I come together and we figure out the magic formula. and we've healed everybody. But in jiu-jitsu, it really can, the stroke is the worst case scenario,
Hmm.
because the dissection is, sadly enough, it's probably happening more than we know,
Hmm.
because it's not being diagnosed, because it's very hard to diagnose. And so, and again, it's, nobody's going to run a CTA scan on somebody who just has some minor, dizziness or dehydration type, or just
Yeah.
doesn't feel right, unless there's a reason, and so,
Some of
um,
the people I've spoken to who have had those collisions and then had a stroke as a result of a dissection, uh, it happened many, many months later, sometimes 6, 12, 24
right,
months later. And the dissection wasn't maybe that dramatic at the beginning, but over time and further movements and further trauma, then it becomes larger and larger. And then eventually the dissection becomes big enough where it either falls off, and that is what causes the blockage, or because of the blood flow and what you mentioned earlier in that article, the increased rate of blood flow where the narrowing happens, it changes the way that the blood travels, and it creates a high pressure and a low pressure system behind the dissection, and that is what creates the clot. Sometimes the clot gets stuck there and doesn't dislodge for a long, long time, and then it moves after another trauma or another movement or something that dislodges it, right? So you're right. It's it's difficult to link the two, because the person who experiences the stroke might not happen when they've been to BJJ. It might happen 2 years
right.
after they've stopped going to BJJ, and they're wondering, how did this happen to me? But the major trauma happened when they were at BJJ, perhaps, right? So
That's
what's
kind of the thought process. Yeah.
yeah, and what's interesting is, with these emerging sports, you know, NFL in the United States and AFL in Australia, um, are really starting to take seriously CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy, which is the multiple collisions of the heads against head, and the concussions that happen, and what that's doing um, to players, and sending them into fits of uh, anger, depression, rage, and some of them are causing serious harm to the community and to their loved ones and to themselves before they end up killing themselves. Right, so it started to become a serious thing now, but it's taken so many decades. If you imagine about um, how long the NFL has been around and how long AFL has been around in Australia. It's nearly 100 years or more, and 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 it's only now starting to be taken seriously. And that's because I think there was not enough reach. The people like you and I that were doing the kind of work that you're doing didn't have these platforms of podcasts, YouTube, um, social media to share, and they weren't able to raise awareness that fast, and they weren't able to be taken seriously because there was a lot of money at stake. Imagine now if the NFL was in a position where they had to alter their sports to avoid collisions of the head, it would be a completely different sport. And this is another underlying issue, right? So BJJ, yeah, imagine being Brazilian Jiu Jitsu uh, spectator and then going to BJJ and not seeing people getting strangled.
I mean, it's what's interesting about that, though. Here, and you're right. So, the fun, that's, there's kind of like, you got different ways to submit the person, and a lot of times it's arm locks, joint locks of, like, a wrist lock, an arm lock. What's really popular these days are knee locks, ankle locks, um, and so the that's a lot of opportunities to right there, so the head's only one of many. um, the head, to be honest, is the funnest part, the strangle is the fun part. That's probably just our primitive nature of, that strangle. And when you do it with the gi and you really get fancy with wrapping that thing around people's necks, um, and from different angles and upside down, and you're basically upside down wrapping gis around people's necks and arms, and that's what we consider fun, and it really is. It's a puzzle. However, what I'm trying to say is this. What's interesting though is if you look at the evolution um, of the police force. I do some private lessons with some Milwaukee police officers, and we just do combative type situationals, and I show them everything that they can do, and basically they just can't touch the neck and the head. So it's still fun to grapple with these guys. We're going at it and doing different moves, pulls, takedowns. Like, you can still control people and have fun. I'm not saying that that's where we need to go. However, again, even in this paper here, it says that the Marines themselves have their own protocols that the Marine Corps recommends that in training, chokeholds and related maneuvers should not be at full force and never more than 5 seconds duration during training. In this case, what happened to this guy, the patient had subjected himself to repeated exposures over several years as part of his task as a trainer, which is what I was doing. A lot of us trainers are allowing hey, you're having a problem with that choke, do it on me. Let me feel it. Oh, that's not tight enough. You need to adjust a little bit more here. No, more torque. You got to turn your back here. Get underneath crank it.
Wow.
And so that's, looking back, there was a lot of trauma to my neck, and so, and then once you had so much trauma that the clot started growing and growing and growing, and so that's so I'm just fascinated by this article that there could be something out there called a duplex ultrasound that could be something that I could just go around with my training partners, and if we do recognize that there is some type of scar or it's a lesion is what it is.
Yeah.
We could say, hey,
increased blood flow and lesion.
Yeah.
You'll see the speed of the blood flow and the lesion. So tell me about you then, man. Is your neck and your head out of bounds these days?
I mean, so out of bounds, like, no, I it's not. I mean, I've been playing with fire probably. It's out of bounds from what this guy was doing, letting people, hey, I don't do the in practice, I don't let people do it on me. So like that's the other thing people have to understand is what the danger is what we have for each other is that in traditional jiu-jitsu practice, we're choking each other back and forth in practice, for a half an hour before we go into combative training. So we're like working the chokes with each other to tighten up our chokes. And so over time that creates trauma over to the same spots. So it's like, if you think about it, it's the same spot, because that's just how, like, where your hands go on the gi or where their hands go on the neck. So you're working the same spot. So I don't let people do that to me. And if we're practicing chokes that day, I will go and join another 2 people, and I'll be the third person. Unfortunately, I have a stint in my neck, and I don't know the ramifications of that thing breaking. I don't know. I don't want to find out. However, in training, they do attack my neck. Some of them do. some of them maybe don't go. Like I have a coach who's more advanced than me. We roll with each other. He doesn't attack my neck.
Yeah.
He attacked me in other ways.
The ramifications are huge, man. If the stent gets damaged and then it causes a clot, then it's an issue. Then could cause another stroke, need to be removed and replaced, etc. So um, I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I'm just just sort of saying what I understand about it, right? Which is that the ramifications are huge. We've already spoken about it at length. What the ramifications are: damage to a carotid artery. A stent is in a similar situation. Now, the uh, the fact that you reached out to me suggests to me that you're on a bit of a crusade. You want to no, let me rephrase. It's not a crusade. You're on a campaign to raise awareness, because that's definitely not what you're on, right? And are you getting traction? Are you struggling to get traction?
I'm getting horrible traction. I'm getting wonderful emails from wonderful people, like one guy every couple months, telling me this is great, and telling me to keep my head up, and keep doing what you're doing, kid. It's going to pay off, and you're doing, and really encouraging things. And I had the conversation with the spouse of somebody who's died. Had the conversation of the sister-in-law who's her sister's husband died, doing jiu-jitsu. Crazy story about that is she's telling me, she's like, we just hit this one story was really bad. And you hear all the stories, and this one sounded like there was blood involved. Mine didn't have blood involved. This gentleman didn't make it. And what's very interesting about this story is that he didn't make it. And then the family was kind of like, what happened? They couldn't come to terms. And then the crazy thing is, it's like a couple of weeks after his death, the family was trying to come to terms with, and a book showed up on the doorstep that he must have ordered, before he passed. And the book was called The Art of Strangles.
Yeah, it is an art, and I understand the combative nature of it and why, especially men do it. Now, I'm not a female, and I don't know any women in the sport, so that's why I'm not commenting on their behalf, right? But I know why men do it, because I know why my son does it. I know why my mates participate in BJJ. They all talk about the positive impact that it has on their self-confidence, on their ability to overcome challenges, on their ability to transform their personal lives by using the skills and applying them to regular life. It's definitely kept a lot of the people that I know who do it out of anxiety and depression. And for the people that are listening to this and thinking, my God, these guys say that they choke their friends, this is something that people do as comrades. They do it as people who are collaborating to teach each other how to get better at dealing with adversity in life, and then that is transformational in the rest of their lives. They're not doing it to hurt each other, although people do get hurt. It's about actually in growth and overcoming and becoming better versions of themselves.
And that's just one small little piece of it, because I believe the bigger piece is the coming together and getting better as a community, as a brotherhood, as a sisterhood. It's almost like it almost feels like a fraternity. Like this is like these relationships that are built inside these where people are going to battle with each other together every single day, and then taking that out and going to competitions and fighting others. It's a tribe. It's more than a fraternity. It's more than a family.
Yeah.
It's a full on tribe that you don't get anywhere else.
Yeah.
So to have that taken away from you, do you think most people walk away from this sport? No, they don't. These
Mm.
crazy tech people, they don't. They keep doing it because that's how strong it is. All I'm saying is the crusade that I'm on is a awareness crusade. It is, and it's this. It's you just have to bring this to the table to your people who are stepping on the mats and let them know this is something that can happen. That's all you have to say.
That's it.
If this happens, then XYZ, here are the protocols. Listen, you don't even have to talk about it. Just put it on the wall. And so if it does happen, we have the protocols of what, like you said, make sure when you don't put the guy in the car. He doesn't drive, he or she doesn't drive by themselves. You drive them or you call an ambulance if XYZ. When you get there, this is what you say. You tell them you do this. These are the scans that we've had success, finding these clots. And so just having that safety protocol it's gonna save lives
Yeah.
100%,
Indeed.
because you can't go on the mat and just not know that this is gonna happen. It's so going back to my surfer thing, it's like a surfer going and surfing in a lake, a freshwater lake.
Yeah. Doesn't
That's
work.
how it is. Well, it's let's just say there's some fancy waves or like a water park, they got the artificial waves. You
Yeah.
don't think there's any sharks in there.
Yep.
So you just get in, you're surfing, then you find out there's sharks. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like catches you by surprise. That's what I'm saying. It shouldn't catch us by surprise. Like if we know the signs. So the good news is that I have a number of case studies of people who have found that they had a dissection. They treated it by staying off the mats and getting better and healing, and then not having the stroke. Well, there you go. So
Perfect.
there's a win for the team. So now if everybody can but this guy was like a logical dude. Like when he got home, like he did the research and then he found my articles. He said, "Oh, maybe I have a dissection." And then he took himself to the doctor and said, "Doc, I think I might have a dissection. Here's why. This is what we do." Then they did the right tests, and then they found it. And then, sure as shit, it took 6 months. But he said it went from whatever size to basically gone in 6 months. So basically, he just had to stay off the mats. But if he would have done what I did, which is just keep going on the mats and training every day, then I had a stroke. He didn't. So he wins. But I'm glad I helped him win. I feel good. I'm a coach for doing that. And that's basically that's the crusade I'm on. It's just, hey guys, just here, treat it accordingly. That's it.
Yeah. Know the risks. I love it.
That's it. That's it.
Absolutely love it. So, Chris, where can people find out a little bit more about you and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. So I'm kind of all over the place, obviously, if you haven't figured it out through my interview. But um, the hashtag that you can kind of find me at is BizJitsu, which is BIZJITSU, BizJitsu. So that's like my Instagram. I believe my YouTube channel. I have a Medium blog, medium.com, and that's also BizJitsu is going to be the username for that as well. So any of those, my YouTube, I have, you'll find different interviews. Many of the interviews are posted. So if people are looking for they want to hear a story about a like-minded, like what the signs, symptoms were for that student, they can hear it there. My Medium blog is going to have all my protocols and interviews and just kind of stories, and you can kind of follow my story over the course of the years through my interviews. And if you just go onto Google and you type in, jiu-jitsu strokes from jiu-jitsu or strokes of BJJ from chokes, you're going to just get bombarded with probably some of my articles. I don't know maybe it's just my SEO, but I believe that's how people are finding me. So
Okay. What I'll do is I'll post all of the links to all of your socials and your website to the show notes. So anybody who wants to get that can basically go to recoveryafterstroke.com/episodes, and they'll be able to pick through all of the episodes. At the very top or near the top after you've heard this episode will be the Chris Martin interview. And then from there, you'll be able to click on that and see all the different links to the website and his socials and his YouTube. And hopefully what we can do is share the crap out of this episode and put it in front of as many people as possible so that we can assist in raising awareness, because my podcast is called Recovery After Stroke. But of course, I would rather my podcast didn't exist and never existed, because that meant I never had a stroke and nobody else that I know on this podcast has had a stroke. So let's see if we can support you in that journey that you're on. I really appreciate you doing it. It's very rare that you find people who have taken on the preventative side of the stroke journey. And I think that you will 100% save lives, and you will make people get diagnosed sooner, which will impact their stroke recovery and hopefully make it shorter. And then, it'll have families recover sooner, and people have their dads and their mums for longer, and their kids for longer. And that's all that we want to do, isn't it? There's no need for us to just lose people unnecessarily to this situation.
Especially doing what we love and what we think is healthy, to not know, and then to come home and to lose somebody, or to lose your loss of daily living skills, is doing what you love is not, it's yeah.
Thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for what you do, and thank you to all the listeners as well who are helping us and helping you spread the awareness as well. So thank you.
Importantly, we present many podcasts designed to give you an insight and understanding into the experiences of other individuals. Opinions and treatment protocols discussed during any podcast are the individual's own experience, and we do not necessarily share the same opinion, nor do we recommend any treatment protocol discussed. All content on this website and any linked blog, podcast, or video material controlled this website or content is created and produced for informational purposes only and is largely based on the personal experience of Bill Gasiamis. The content is intended to complement your medical treatment and support healing. It is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice and should not be relied on as health advice. The information is general and may not be suitable for your personal injuries, circumstances, or health objectives. Do not use our content as a standalone resource to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease for therapeutic purposes or as a substitute for the advice of a health professional. Never delay seeking advice or disregard the advice of a medical professional, your doctor, or your rehabilitation program based on our content. If you have any questions or concerns about your health or medical condition, please seek guidance from a doctor or other medical professional. If you are experiencing a health emergency or think you might be, call 000 if in Australia, or your local emergency number immediately for emergency assistance, or go to the nearest hospital emergency department. Medical information changes constantly. While we aim to provide current, quality information in our content, we do not provide any guarantees and assume no legal liability or responsibility for the accuracy, currency, or completeness of the content. If you choose to rely on any information within our content, you do so solely at your own risk. We are careful with links we provide. However, third-party links from our website are followed at your own risk, and we are not responsible for any information you find there.